Well, welcome and good evening, everybody, to our EETAC meeting, Envision Eugene Technical Advisory Committee. It is Thursday, December 1st, and I'm Tiffany Edwards, the chair of the EETAC, and I'm glad to see you all. It's been a while. So we're meeting by Zoom, which we've been doing for quite a while now. So just as a reminder, if you have anything to add, go ahead and either raise your hand virtually, or I can usually see if there's as few of you as there is today, that I can usually see you all. And try to keep your camera on and all that good stuff. Oh, and try to avoid or just avoid using the chat function, because we want to try to preserve the transparency for the viewing public. So the first order of business is agenda review. So if anyone has anything to make comments on or has had a chance to review the agenda and anything to add, now would be a time. I did have a question, Elena, about I think there was at least one other EETAC member, and I didn't know if any decisions had been made just because of a new role that he has, which is Alexis, and I didn't know if that was anything we needed to
Yeah, I think I shot you an email a little while ago, just this afternoon, but he is planning to join at the end of the meeting.
Okay.
To make an announcement.
Make his updates. Okay,
yes,
perfect.
Yes.
I will look for him then. That was the only thing that I had. So I don't see, oh, we have Lisa joining us. So 5:32, make note of that. Hi, Lisa. Good to have you. We just got started, so. Oh, Phil, your audio is not working. Okay. So how about if you give us a thumbs up when you do get it working and let us know he's coming back. Okay. I would love to maybe move to the next item, which is the approval of the October 6th Zoom meeting summary. And hopefully you all had a chance to review that.
I move to approve.
All right. Thanks, John.
I'll second.
Okay. Sue, is that what your hand was raised for?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any discussion? Okay, I'll go ahead and call for a motion. All those in favor of approving the minutes from October 6th, go ahead and raise your hand. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, Ed McMahon. Thanks, Ed. Okay. At this time, we also are going to offer public comment for any of the public who would like to address this committee. Elena, I'll look to you to see if there's anybody who's joined us as a participant, or
Sure.
I should say as an attendee.
It looks like we do have a few folks on the call with us today.
Okay.
So I'm going to allow them to talk, to just introduce themselves if they'd like to make a comment, or just let us know they're here watching. So I'm going to allow John to talk first.
Perfect. I'm seeing that he's muted. Maybe he, oh, there we go.
Oh, hi, John Quetzalcoatl Murray. I'm with Whole Community News. We do boards, commissions, nonprofits, neighborhoods, all the stuff that the commercial news people can't really afford to cover anymore. We provide it free. So I'm hoping to start covering the EETAC. Thank you so much.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John. Great to have you. And we do have one other participant.
Looks like Lauren.
Lauren. Okay, Lauren, if you would like to address the committee.
Well, it looks like they are using an older version of Zoom.
Okay.
That doesn't allow me to allow them to talk. It looks like I've never gotten that notice before.
Okay.
But that is what Zoom is telling me. So.
Okay. Oh, here, hold on. I have something in the chat. Hopefully, okay, that's just Phil. Well, let's see. So I guess Lauren, if there is something you would like to address the committee, Elena, would an email address be
Sure.
appropriate to
Yeah.
send something that we could all receive by email?
Yeah, if you'd like to send any comment, and you can send that to me, and it's at Domingo, so EDOMINGO at eugene-or.gov. And I can pass that on to folks.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you. Sorry about that. Hopefully we can get that resolved. And I don't see anybody else who would like to make any comments, so I think we can move on to the election of officers.
Awesome.
And okay,
I'll take
so
that away.
what'd you say,
I said
Elaine?
I can take that. I can take that over and jump in if you want.
That'd be great. Yes, I see that you are assigned to that item, so go for it.
So we are asking folks to nominate themselves for chair and co-chair. With Kevin leaving as co-chair, that kind of triggered a special election. But we also haven't done election for chair this year either. So the intention would be for chair and co-chair to serve from now through next July. And so it's not quite a full year term. The thought is to try and get back on track sort of with the fiscal year, like some of the other boards and commissions. That tends to not happen because sometimes we have breaks in the summertime, so it doesn't always totally line up. But the intention would be for this chair and co-chair to serve through July. And yes, would anybody like to nominate themselves? I think Tiffany expressed willingness to serve on as chair for a second term, but also doesn't want to take the opportunity away from anybody else. So
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy to continue doing it. And again, it's through July, and we will be recruiting some new members. And so, I think that would be a good opportunity. But of course, if any of you are chomping at the bit, please, by no means do I want to stop anyone. But we also will need a vice chair. So I am happy to continue. And
I guess just some of the duties expected really are just reviewing the agenda that staff sends out for the meetings, managing as chair or filling in for chair if they're gone, to manage the queue and the conversation at the meetings, and then making possible appearances in front of decision makers as representatives for ETAC.
yes. Yes, one of the big perks is you get to see the agenda ahead of time. So sneak peek.
I nominate Tiffany as chair.
Thank you,
I
John.
second.
Thank you, Sue and Phil, fighting over seconding that motion. Is there any discussion? Well, I am happy to do it. Like I said, this is a very, very easy and anyway, I'll just say it's a pleasure to serve in this role. So I'll go ahead and call for the motion. All those in favor, raise your hand. I guess I'll vote for myself. Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Phew. It's always nice to win without opposition. Now I would love to see if any of you would be interested in maybe, and you can just bring it up in the form of a discussion, serving as a vice chair. Very rarely, in rare occasions, as you know, when we've had Kevin jump in, I've needed him to just basically run the meetings, but we get the agendas ahead of time, and it's been pretty straightforward. So anyone willing to step into that? Or willing to nominate someone to do it?
I'll do
Ah.
it through July.
Okay. I would love to nominate John Borofsky as vice chair. Phil Farrington, second that motion?
Yes.
And Mark. Okay, great. So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, I'll go ahead and call for the vote. So all of those in favor, John Borofsky as the vice chair. Any opposed? I think I see everybody's hand. So that motion passes unanimously as well. Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.
So I move to have no meetings until after July.
Um,
That's
I'm gonna-
funny, Don.
And then I'm gonna pass it to Heather to chat really quick about reappointments.
Yeah, that is a particularly funny motion given how many things are coming down the pike. So that I don't even think we should let this motion go to the table. The other thing I want to put out there is that it is helpful, I think, for everyone to take a turn. So whenever you're feeling like you can fit it into your schedule to be the chair or the vice chair, I think it is helpful because it is a lot for, I mean, not a lot, it's not a ton, but I mean, when you're having to manage the meeting and you want to provide your comment, it's nice to give those folks a break. So that's my plug for July. So as you may recall, when we originally appointed folks, everyone got to literally draw out of a hat in order to stagger our appointments. And so some people got a 1-year appointment, a 2-year appointment, 3-year appointment, or 4-year appointment. And then we were adding 4 years to each of those once those 1, 2, and 3 and 4 year appointments were up. And so those were just basically a reappointment that was not, it was your 4 years plus those additional years. And we actually skipped it for 3 years. We didn't have to do one then, but we do have to do it for 4 years. And so those folks are Ed, Phil, Rick, and Tiffany. And so I know, Ed, that you have indicated your interest in going off the committee when we are back up and running with more of a full group. And so I am wondering if you would be willing to stay on until the the recruitment, I was going to say the completeness review, the recruitment is done. If not, that's totally fine, but I want to put that out there as an option. And if you want to get back to us and think about it, because I know the last time we had talked about it, we were like, could you just stay on through getting the report done? And it keeps kind of extending. So I just want to recognize that, recognize your value on the committee. We've really appreciated your time and we completely understand if you don't want to continue through recruitment. We have reached out to the group in the city manager's office that works on boards and recruitments, and that will start in March. And so we don't anticipate having new members until late spring at this point. I don't think we need to wait until July because this is an advisory board. So this is or advisory committee. It's a little bit different. It's not as formal as like planning commission. So we'll try to get on new folks as soon as we can, but I just wanted to give you a heads up on timeline.
Okay.
And then the other folks, if you are interested in your renewal for 4 years.
And so Heather, do you want us to voice that today or tonight, or would you like us to follow up in any?
Yeah, I mean, if you know now and you're ready to continue for a reappointment, that would be great. If you want to think about it, that's fine too.
Okay, I see Ed's hand. Go ahead, Ed.
Thank you. It's been an honor to serve with this group and everything. But I was at another meeting last night on the River Road Santa Clara plan. And, I see that the urban growth boundary is not going to be reviewed again until 2026. And that really had an effect on me on agreements and things that have been made in the past. And what I'm realizing is I'm at the point in my life where I want to improve my quality of life. And this is becoming somewhat frustrating and it's not improving my quality of life. So I think this will probably be my last meeting. And I feel good about that because of all the people on the committee. I know it'll go in a good direction.
Thank you, Ed. Well, you know, I'm obviously you've been a huge asset to this committee. So definitely goes without saying. And I'm absolutely heartbroken to see you go. And I hope to continue to see you because it's been a while, but I do understand. Absolutely. There's a lot of frustrating things happening. So please definitely know that I personally understand. So I'll just jump in and say I'm happy to continue serving. I think, you know, I really enjoy being part of the work that we do here, and I feel like it gives me a level of understanding about all of the land use processes and decisions that are being made at various levels, and I think it's really helpful. So I certainly appreciate it, and I am dedicated and committed to continuing to contribute my time in this way. So if you'll continue to have me, I'm happy to continue to serve for another term. And if anyone else wants to say anything or just maybe, you know, give it some thought. And I think if you want to let staff know, you know, you're also welcome to reach out to me for any reason if you want to do that and have a conversation or let me know your thoughts. Or maybe I can help twist people's arms. Sue, I see your hand raised. Go ahead. Sue, I think you're still muted. Sorry.
It didn't work. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I have a couple comments. One is that, you know, Ed has a body of knowledge that is nobody else has. So, and I totally understand because I'm in a lot the same position he is, that I'm of an age where, you know, there are other things to do in this short timeline. I love this, so I'm going to stick around. But I think it's really important that we get some young people who are ready to take on what many of us have done for the last 20 years. And so I think it's a really good opportunity to think very planfully about who should be involved in this next, because it is important work. And it's also important that there's a thread that gets carried through so that the intention, the original intention of growth monitoring particularly, so that original intention gets carried on. So thank you, Ed. I've always relied on you for having the most analytical understanding of the impact of these decisions on home building. And, you know, having a real estate background, I know how these policies and things can really make a difference. So I'm going to miss you. And I think that's unfortunate that we don't have that same thing. But maybe there's somebody behind you who has the same commitment and that same body of knowledge, because I think that's super important. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Yeah, so I want to second that, Ed. I think if you have any good recommendations and folks that are kind of involved in your work and you know, certainly I know I would be happy to talk to anyone about kind of what the group does and what we, you know, the commitment and everything else, and try to help. I know that Heather and Elena and other staff members would be happy to help bring somebody up to speed and whatnot. So Phil, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to continue to serve at the pleasure of the city manager who appointed me, and rest of this group. If you feel I can make a contribution, happy to do it. Ed, I'm going to be sorry to see you leave. I've enjoyed you know, kibitzing with you over the years in and out of this committee. And I think you do bring a whole lot. I think Sue makes an outstanding suggestion though of you know, youth should be served. I think we're planning for another generation or two. And I think it would be really smart for us to have some young people on the committee. And so, you know, I'm happy to do it, continue doing it if you guys so want me. Thanks.
Okay. Sue, your hand is still up, but I'm assuming that it was from before, so.
No, it was up
Oh.
again.
It's a new one. Okay, go for it.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm super relieved to hear Phil's comment, because Phil is another person with a tremendous body of knowledge and history of experience with land use issues. And we desperately need that kind of information on this group. So thank you, Phil.
Okay, I have John and then Heather's got her hand raised. So John, go ahead.
Thanks. Ed, everybody said things that I would say as well. And when I heard you were leaving, I was like, gosh darn it, we're losing the legislative history that you bring to the table. And then when Sue spoke, I was like, gosh, that it makes a lot of sense. You guys, you and Sue and Rick and the early on Envision Eugene team, that was on there, got us started down this road. I kind of came in during the transition when it was, before it was EETAC, when it was, what was it before? I can't even remember the acronym. But kind of I kind of came in that transition stage, and I think we're at a transition stage now, whereas, the stuff that we built on is important, but where we're going is as important as where we've been. And so I still think we've got enough people here that have the legislative memory so that we don't repeat the same mistakes. But yet we can move forward and pass it on to the next group of willing fools. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Heather.
Well, I just want to echo everything that we just heard about Ed. I mean, I was not planning, Ed, for this to be a thank you, and I'm get a little emotional because the TRG, John Borofsky, TRG, this is going back years. And like I said, I'm a little emotional because I was hoping we could kind of arm wrestle you, but like Sue said, we totally understand. And we thank you and your families and your friends who have really supported you and allowed you all to be volunteering at night. I mean, I understand, staff understands what kind of commitment that is, and you're not getting paid necessarily to do that. And even if you are, it's still a commitment of your time, and so I just thank you immensely. And I thank you for helping us get our first growth monitoring report. I do recognize that there are a lot of things that have been that are in front of us right now with climate friendly and equitable communities that are not allowing us to move as fast on things that we had hoped we would be able to do. I was going to save this to talk about at the end or just touch on, but I think it's appropriate to do right now as you're thinking about other folks that might want to be involved in the EETAC. Urban Reserves is working its way through, it started the adoption process, our bylaws, and the bylaws were very focused on growth monitoring, and Urban Reserves was kind of added to that because of the relationship. Well, I know it doesn't feel, it feels far away, Ed, but to me, we have 3 years to relook, update our urban growth boundary, including a new housing needs assessment, a new employment assessment. So those big documents that help us adopt our urban growth boundary, redo our buildable lands inventory. So you all got a sense of that in monitoring. We sat through multiple meetings with Thea where you guys helped make sure the methodology made sense and was sound. So now we need to update the BLI again. because we are starting in January, we are starting the process to relook at our urban growth boundary. And so because we have to, we only have 3 years, and then we anticipate a year for adoption because it's due to be adopted. It has to be in effect by December of 2026. And so we believe really we need to start the adoption process in around January of 2026. So that leaves us 3 years, what it took us 7 to 8 years to do last time. And that's not including visioning. I mean, this is a reboot, or not a reboot. This is a refresh of the urban growth boundary using monitoring data, using the new Oregon administrative rules. And so it will be that, what's our land supply? What's the demand? So we did a little bit of that in the growth monitoring report. We did kind of a truncated version of, if we started analyzing our UGB today, what would we have a deficit in? And then we'll need to look at efficiency measures. So those development incentives to develop more compactly, because we do believe that we don't have enough vacant and partially vacant land to accommodate our need. That's what our initial back of the napkin showed in the growth monitoring report. And then if there's still a need, we'll need to look at expansion. And so that all is going to need to start. And I think what I would like you all to think about is that I think that this is the right group to review those technical documents. You've basically already been doing it. You are, like I said, you already looked at a rerun of the buildable lands inventory. We'd just be bringing that up to date. We'll be talking about what assumptions, based on growth monitoring data, what ones to carry forward for the next 20 years. So it's basically application of the growth monitoring that we've been doing. And I think some of you probably thought that was going to happen anyway, like it's a logical review for this group, but our bylaws are silent on reviewing the UGB analysis at that depth. It's very much about urban reserves and reviewing monitoring trends. And so it's what I'm proposing, and I think we can talk about it more at the next meeting. But what that would entail is needing to update our bylaws, and there's some other things about membership and terms and things like that that I think need a refresh. And then also, when we were reviewing both growth monitoring and urban reserves materials, we were averaging about 11 meetings a year. So sometimes that was twice a month and then nothing in the summer, but essentially it equated to about 1 meeting a month. And I think we would be around that again, at least for 2023 and probably part of 2024. And then it might drop off a little bit and then bump back up again. So those are the things I just want to put out there as you're thinking about, like Ed, as you're thinking about recruitment for us. And then all the rest of you, if that seems reasonable, we would like to really work on the bylaws early next year for that. Because like I said, we need to run the BLI in January. So.
Great, thanks, Heather. Sue, I see your hand.
To me, that makes total sense that we would continue. The idea of the city staff having to go start all over again and create a new committee, it just is so inefficient. And we have a basis of knowledge and experience and information that seems like it's very applicable to the next step. So I really hope that we can stick together and do that, because I think it's the most efficient and time effective and cost effective way to approach the topic.
Thanks, Sue. Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I had to miss the last meeting. I did review the video of the meeting, and I know that Heather, you went over the CFAC timeline, and you made reference to some cities who have filed appeals, but nonetheless we're still proceeding with, assuming that it's going to go ahead. The question, I guess, is Springfield also on that same timeline? And are you dialed in with Springfield in terms of like the scenario planning?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, we have to be, because
Okay.
scenario planning is done regionally.
Okay.
And so, yeah, we're coordinating with them, although that has a later deadline than some of the other requirements.
Okay, good to know. Thanks.
Yeah.
And Heather, I do have a question about that. So because since our last meeting, we now know that the city was granted an extension for, I don't remember the first component
For
of
parking rules only.
for parking, right? And I didn't know, okay, I was just curious because I don't believe that Springfield was.
I don't know.
I
I mean,
right? Yeah.
we're coordinating with them on the things that are regional.
Yeah.
And kind of analysis and the state and things that the state, like the climate friendly area study, we will be coordinating with them to some degree because we're using the same consultants. But
Okay.
and there are not all of the components that we're required to implement through CFAC, climate friendly equitable communities, are allowed to have their deadlines requested for adjustment. So we're still figuring all that stuff out.
Okay. Okay, perfect. All right. John, I see your hand. I just want to mention to you all, for whatever reason, whenever I'm in this ETAC meeting, my computer does that thing where it's forcing to restart. It goes months without doing this, and then all of a sudden, so I'm going to be swapping. I already got my other one fired up and ready, so it will just take really quickly. So I'll go ahead and you'll see two of me for a second, but John, go ahead.
So Heather, with that new charge of the committee and us looking for recruitments of new people, I guess the question I would have would be, when the TRG got implemented, there were certain sectors that we were definitely targeting to have input on it. And I think that that's very important, that we make sure that we get the right people representing the right constituencies if we're moving into that type of a phase. Because if we're just doing growth monitoring, that's one thing, but to be the technical advisory group on UGB expansion, I mean, Ed was in there, Rick was in there. There were people that had specific expertise and brought in thoughts that were relative to those decisions. So I hope that we, one, identify what stakeholders we think would be important to bring in, and then do an active recruiting to make sure that the committee is balanced more towards, not just towards growth monitoring, but towards this goal of doing UGB analysis.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and we should talk about, this is like a shot over the bow, because I want to talk about this more at the next meeting. If you guys want to kind of get prepared for that, definitely take a look at the bylaws. I think we did talk about those diverse areas of interest and experience and background. And I believe when we did the recruitment the first time, we talked about that because it's really all the same issues. I know, anyway, without getting further into it, I mean, that it is important to have that same mix for growth monitoring, because that is the data that we will use in UGB analysis. And when I say UGB analysis, I don't mean UGB expansion only. I'm talking about what is our population growth for the next 20 years? What's our land supply? What's the density we should be assuming on that land supply? We had some questions about that when we reran it the last time, right? In monitoring. And so it's the same questions we're just going to be talking about. And there can definitely be other committees or not other committee, but other stakeholders that we would reach. Well, there definitely will be other stakeholders that we will reach out to as we go through the UGB analysis process. This will not be the only committee. There, if we're looking at development incentives, there's a whole group of folks that we'll need to reach out to about that. Same with UGB if we're looking at a UGB expansion, but those are all lots of ifs right now. Thanks.
Okay. I think we can move on. I'm pulling up the agenda again. Lisa,
Actually-
go ahead. I know you actually had to jump off. Do you need
Yeah,
to?
I was just gonna say, sorry, I often have work commitments at night, and this is one of them where I'm giving a presentation in just a few minutes, so I will jump off pretty soon. But if even despite these commitments that sometimes conflict, I'm willing to hang in there if that's of help.
Yes, absolutely. And good luck with your presentation.
Thank you. Always nerve-wracking, but at least I get to do it from my house, That's nice. And Ed, thank you for your work on this committee and looking backwards, looking forwards. I'm sure you'll continue to influence things, and appreciate you so much.
Yeah. Okay, are we ready? Should we move on? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let you all, Heather and Elena can take over on the next item, which is the growth monitoring housing mix chart formatting.
Yeah, exciting. As I'm sharing my screen here, part of the reason we got so, or I got so specific about this being just reformatting is because I know everyone is really interested in how much middle housing are we seeing? What is, since the code amendments happened, and just to give you a little bit of an update on that, Elena is fully immersed in reviewing our building permits that, and we've talked about this before, it takes some time to review those building permits for BLI impact and making sure that the data is accurate and the incentives are accurate. And so we're doing that review now. Back to when we wrote the growth monitoring report, we had to stop, right? Stop reviewing building permits. So there's a bit of, there's over a year of a backlog of data of permits to review. So really what this is doing is, since we adopted the middle housing code amendments, there are some new definitions and new ways of categorizing housing. So just bear with me as I walk through this. Hopefully you all got to read it. Is it large enough? Do I need to make it bigger? Okay, a little bit.
Works for me, but if others need, I also have reading glasses right here. So.
Is that better? Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to start with the way that we have been talking about housing mix. So what is the mix at a high level of the type of housing units or dwellings that what we've been reporting on are the new dwellings, and what mix have they been compared to what we forecast, right? That's typically the main question. And so what we did is I put together this table to basically be a cross-reference between the terminology that was used in the 2021 in the 2021 monitoring report and how it's updated because of the land use code amendments. So at a high level, we've talked about for housing mix, single family detached, single family attached, which was mainly row houses, and then multifamily at a high level. And so that's what this column is about. And then we break that down further and we say, okay, but can you break down single family a little bit more? And so we have single family detached. And then when you actually get to the specific uses, we've got, one family dwellings, manufactured homes and accessory dwellings. So it basically goes, kind of like an umbrella. Single family attached, there really was no additional breaking down of single family attached for housing mix subcategory and zoning use. It really was just about row houses. So that's what you're seeing here, single family attached, and row houses. Multifamily was where it got broken up a little bit more as we had multifamily housing mix, and then we broke it into 2 to 4 dwelling units or 5+ dwelling units. We also had this other category, but that was a pretty small amount. And then when you look at the actual zoning uses for each of these, 2 to 4 units was duplex, triplex, fourplex, and then 5 or more units was broken down into 5 to 19 or 20 or more dwelling units. So really it was single family and multifamily that break out a little bit more into more specific categories. So with the code amendments, there were some pretty easy changes where wholesale, we got rid of the term family when we're talking about dwelling units, because it is not all related people that live in a dwelling unit. And so we got rid of that descriptor, and so changed single family to single unit. And we also changed in housing mix multifamily to multi-unit. So that was basically a word change. And that happened again here for the subcategory. So everywhere that's underlined is new. Where it gets a little bit more tricky is that it would be easy to say that single family attached was just renamed to middle housing, but that is not the case. Single family attached or row houses are really now a subcategory, a sub-use of this new category of middle housing. And so what the reason that is because middle housing in the land use code is not just row houses. It also includes duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. So these were all uses that we had originally called multifamily. They were part of the multifamily housing mix, but now with the new middle housing, they get moved out of that category and get moved into this new middle housing housing mix.
Heather, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm curious as to whether or not, because I've heard anecdotally maybe that there's a lot of middle housing that exists within the community that's been there for a long time, but it's either not permitted as such or it's not. I mean, maybe that's not correct, but I'm just curious if we ever were able to capture that in any way, or is there a lot of middle housing out there that we actually hadn't factored because we didn't identify it as such?
So middle housing was a terminology before we adopted it into our code.
Sure.
That was a national term. We just didn't have it in our code.
Right.
And so what we really did was we put it in our code and then we reclassified things that were already in our code. So a duplex was a middle housing type before we had middle housing in our code. So duplexes were allowed. They had to be attached before the middle housing code amendments. That's why you're seeing just duplex here and duplex we had to add clarification so that we can track duplexes that are attached and duplexes that are detached now.
Okay.
But yeah, so, row houses are middle housing. We had those, they were allowed in the code. We just didn't call them that. And we didn't call them that in our reporting. And so really what we're doing now is we're just adding this new category, and moving duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes out of the multifamily category and into the middle housing category.
That makes sense. Yeah. Ed, I see your hand.
Thank you. I seem to recall that state law was mentioning that housing mix should be relied on historical data. We're not going to be able to do that anymore. It's changed so much that we're starting from new starting blocks now. Historically, there's nothing we can really use.
So Ed, it's like you're a plant, because we had these same questions. Like we're going, well, wait a minute, we can't have this. This is the chart we used in the monitoring report. So it had our historical data, 2001 to 2002 and 2012. And it had single family detached, it had 0.5% for single family attached, which was really those row houses, and then multifamily. And then we have our monitoring data matches. Well, if now we have middle housing, we can't compare the two. And so what we did is we actually went back to the historical data and reclassified it. So we pulled those duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes out of this middle housing category and put them into this, out of this multifamily housing category and put them into this middle housing category so that we can compare them. And that is with recognition that even though we didn't have the middle housing terminology in our code, it is a nationally known planning term. Middle housing existed and it was defined before we had it in our code. So I felt comfortable doing that, and it allows us to continue to compare historic data because we've recategorized it. Does that make sense?
I actually like it because, I haven't thought it all the way through yet, but it appears to me, well, first of all, I kind of believe that there's a prejudice towards single family housing. And this kind of balances it more with ADUs and duplexes and triplexes and everything else put into that. It takes some of the political pressure off, in my opinion.
And one of the things that and I think, it's funny, it's great that you mentioned that, because you probably remember, Ed, in Envision Eugene, we actually really didn't talk about single family attached a lot. It was like, what is the single family and the multifamily, 55-45, that's what we talked about. But when we went into monitoring, middle housing was bubbling up, and we were like, we're kind of missing the middle discussion. We're missing the missing middle discussion by not showing it. And so luckily we had already kind of started moving in that direction. It's just that we didn't have it quite defined. And so, one of the things you all had talked about when you reviewed these early charts was, hey, you've got these middle housing code amendments going forward. Your language doesn't match in your charts. This still says single family. There's this larger category. You're not addressing that. And I am glad we waited, because one of the ones that's kind of interesting is cottage clusters. So cottage cluster housing is now going to be in middle housing, even though it's going to be in the middle housing category. Even though to be a cottage cluster, you have to be more than 4 dwelling units and a bunch of other things. So what's interesting here is that single family detached was typically no more than 2 units on a lot, because it could be single family or it could be an ADU, which has another unit on a lot. And this was, you know, multifamily was more than 2 units, 3 or more units. And now we can't really do exactly the same comparison, because cottage cluster will be in this middle housing, but it will actually be more than 4 units, unlike all the other middle housing types that are in there: row house, duplex, triplex, fourplex. Those are all 1 unit per lot up to 4 units per lot, and then cottage cluster will actually be more than that. So there's a little bit of non-apples to apples comparison to some degree because of that.
Okay, Phil, I see your hand up. There was another hand, but it looks like someone's, so go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, I think it was Ed that had his hand up before, but so is this, could you remind me, is this graphic trying to illustrate the forecasted production of, I'm looking here on the one on the right-hand side. Is it forecasting production of single unit, middle housing, and multiple unit, or is it forecasting need as opposed to demand, or need as opposed to supply?
It is forecasting. So we did the same thing where we translated the old forecast, our existing adopted forecast, into having a middle housing category. And so it is saying that out of our 15,000 new homes that we need through 2032, 20% of them need to be middle housing.
Okay, so that's again 20% of the needed housing needs to be in middle housing format.
That was the forecast. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
Yep. And just keep in mind that, you know, when we made this forecast, if we would have talked about middle housing back then in 2012, we would have been saying middle housing was duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. We didn't have that distinction. In fact, it wasn't even allowed in the code for duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes to be 2 separate or 3 separate units.
Yeah.
So that's new. And we had cottage cluster in the code, but it wasn't defined the way it is now. Yeah, it wasn't defined the way it is now. So there's the cottage cluster wasn't identified the same.
Okay, and I mean, really, this is just a refinement, and I like this. I think this gets us, like you talked about the 55-45. Okay, this is splitting down. That 45%, 25% are going to be traditional apartments, more than 5 units. 20% is going to be this whole, you know, gradation that we have: duplexes, fourplexes, cottage clusters, all that bouillabaisse of middle housing. I am going to have one more question coming up, and I think it's on the next, maybe the next slide. When I review the materials, I have one coming up. Okay, thanks.
I just want to say one more thing about that. One thing that, and I put a note about this up here, but one thing that kind of threw me off the first time we looked at this, when we had recategorized all the information, I was like, whoa, 20%, and we only got 2.3%. Is that right? And so I had to go back to our growth monitoring report and remind myself that of the multifamily dwellings that we saw in the monitoring period, 93% were 5 or more dwellings. So that is right. I mean, I did more than that, but I actually went back and recalculated all the data. But that is actually right, that we really only saw this 1% was just town row houses, And then once we added in the duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes that we got in the monitoring period and pulled them out of multifamily and into this new middle housing, it really only bumped it up a little bit, because most of the attached housing we've seen in the monitoring period was 5 or more units. So I'll scroll down to the next one. Sounds like there might be a question on this one. This is that, so this was housing mix, so single unit detached, middle housing, and multiple unit, new terminology, and then breaking that down further into our subcategories. In the monitoring report, I didn't have other multi-unit on there because it's so small. But just to give you a complete picture, I included it here. But you can see we've replaced the terminology. This really was, when we got to the subcategory level, single family attached really was townhouses. And so now we're just calling it townhouses. And so we still have 2 to 4 dwellings, 5+ dwellings. Those are still the same. So there's actually not a lot of change on these two. Oops.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, this was my question. It's just when I reviewed this before the meeting, and there's a couple of slivers there on the, I mean, I get what you're doing here, but say like on the far right-hand column, you've got 25% that's in the 5+ dwelling units, 12% below that that's in the 2 to 4. Below that is the townhouse. And, just suggesting that it'd be good to have the percentages broken out, although it's a small piece and maybe you just couldn't fit the number in there. So it'd be good to have the numbers just broken out, unless you just interpolate. It's like, I'd have to take off my shoes and do the math here about what's left in that little sliver.
Yeah, we will definitely, I mean, this is auto-generated, and so there's some buffering that happens where it won't show the percentage if the font of the percentage is bigger than the bar. But you're absolutely right. We should have, and really in the original report, this is straight from the report, we should have typed it in. It wouldn't look as pretty, but it would be helpful to have it. I think the text of the report has it, what the percentage is. But yeah,
This is the limitation of the bar chart, right? So
yeah, and I mean, Tableau is amazing. It is an amazing data platform, and there are some limitations, and we have to, we miss some opportunities to do some post-processing of the charts. So the next set we updated, this is showing the bar is our forecast. So again, you're seeing that, like the totals don't change. It's some of the, like this one. So because this was really townhouses, the forecast for it was a lot smaller. But when you add the forecast for 2 to 4 dwellings, that 20% that we saw in the upper chart, you see that one is the one that changed a lot, and this one changed too, but this one to me is really noticeable. I don't know, Phil, is your hand still
Yeah.
up? Oh, okay.
I sort of figured it was
Okay, sorry.
leftover.
And then average net density of dwellings by housing subcategory. So these are our same subcategories. Again, these were just changes in the wording, the language that we're using. We just replaced single family with single unit. So not a lot here. But what I do want to let you know, and we didn't have it in time for this meeting, is that we are going to have a separate, I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller, a separate chart that, so this is average net density of dwellings by housing subcategory. And then we're going to do a separate one that is just for middle housing. Because there are so many, well, one, I think everyone's really interested in what the density is, and the housing types that are in middle housing, the middle housing category, are so different because it's like row houses to cottage clusters to duplexes. You know, they're pretty different. And so we are going to try to do a chart that is just that. This chart is showing the average density for, this is not by type. I mean, it's showing by type, but basically what it means is it's the average density for developments that have single unit detached on them, and the average density for developments that include townhouses. So they could be developments that are a mix, because there is no way, if it's a mix, there's no way to say what the density is just for that housing type, because it's a mix over a development site, right? And so, so we had to do it that way. But for middle housing, in those cases where middle housing is the whole development site, we are able to say, here's what the average is for middle housing over the whole development site in those cases. So anyway, that's coming. We don't have it yet. Oh, that got some excitement.
Okay, hold on. I'm missing my, hold on. I'm sorry, guys. My window, I couldn't see who was first.
John's first.
Go ahead. Howard.
Yes, I see that now. Go ahead, John, and then Howard.
Okay. So I guess one of my questions would be if density on redeveloping sites. So if a house built 2001, if I have a single unit house and I put a detached duplex, which used to be an ADU, but now it could be a detached duplex, would you have to take the density, would you have to subtract that density out of the single unit detached, because now that property is no longer single unit, it is a 2 to 4?
We are doing, this is all reporting on new development. And so we,
So building a new unit on a existing lot would be a new development, correct?
yeah, but we wouldn't go back and remove the density. So if that was a new house and we included the density from that house in our reporting, and then the next year they added another unit and made it a duplex, we would report on the density for both single unit, or I guess we would report on the density for that because it'd be converted to a duplex. We report on the density for that in 2 to 4 dwellings, but we wouldn't go back and change. We wouldn't extract the earlier density because that is what the density was for the single unit house when it came in. We wouldn't go back and edit the density.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure how that would roll through.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
thanks.
in many cases, we know that there's a future housing unit coming. And so we can actually add that in as a future unit in our data collection. And so the density would reflect the full development. So we are trying to do that where we have that information. So in that case, it should be the same density.
Okay. Howard, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. On the chart, I think it's in the page up, the dwellings by housing mix, where you have percent met during the 2012, 2021, and then the forecast. Are you going to be doing kind of some kind of trend analysis, realizing that year to year, it's probably very variable as to new construction. But anyway, is that going to be part of this, and when we might start seeing some of those numbers? I'm just kind of curious with the large unmet need, how that's tracking.
Right. So we did that in the report where we said, like at 53%, we are meeting the need, or we're on track because we're about halfway through the growth monitoring period. But for single unit, we're at 26%. And if we're halfway through, it's not on track. And the same with middle housing, middle housing. If we're at 6% and we're halfway through the growth monitoring period, it's not on track. Whereas multiple unit, even with moving those, duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes out of there, is way beyond what we thought. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and I guess at some point, I guess it's a policy thing. I guess it begs the question as to how realistic some of these adopted forecasts are, because it would appear that you're not going to make it, at least on some of these housing categories.
Yes. Yep. And I think, yeah, exactly. And I think that that's what, when we go into the UGB analysis and we refresh all of our data, we'll have more data since we did this. We'll have a year's worth more of data, which will be great. We'll have a new efficiency measure that middle housing, which we will be able to build in, and we'll have to have a conversation about what percentage of additional capacity to assume. And so hopefully we'll have some middle housing data for that, but it's already built into the OARs about how much to assume. So some of those conversations are going to be, it really is the conversations that we had when we were reviewing the growth monitoring data. What does it mean, and is it an issue? Should we assume this going forward? It's going to be those same conversations.
Yeah. So on the far right, by making these adjustments, obviously the bar there for single family attached increased from, something less than 2,000 units or dwellings to something more like 3. And that percentage then, when it's termed middle housing, went from 6.5 to 6.1%. Okay. Multi-unit, the number is the same. It's like about 6,000 dwellings, but the percentage went up to 149.2% of 149.2% of what? It appears that the number of units stayed constant, but the percentage went up by almost 50%.
It didn't stay constant. I don't know if I can get you those numbers, but I don't know if you can see that the distance between the top of the bar here and this gray line is shorter than the distance here. So this total number actually did go down, because this is now just 5+ units. And so when you take, so it's less units. And since the majority of the multi-unit that came in was 5+ units, the percentage went up, because it's meeting even more of it. Like before, it was 5+ units plus 2 to 4 units, and it was meeting 102% of that demand. But now it's 5+ units and it's meeting more than the demand, because that's almost all that we got.
So what's 100%? That's sort of like, at least on these other charts, you can kind of see 6%, the 100% is whatever it is.
3
For this
Um,
one, you can't, that particular one, since you've exceeded 100%, whether it's 102.7 or 149.2,
Right, it did
it's hard to
exceed.
tell, like, what's
It is.
100% supposed to be.
Yeah, yeah, so you'd have to look at the report. I mean, this is
Okay.
where the charts can't always stand alone. I mean, we in hindsight, we could have put a line of where 100% was, yeah.
Okay.
So multifamily.
So I should be looking on the page, basically the page or pages that you excerpted these out of from the report. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in other words, right here where you're saying it's met 102.7%, any revised version of that report would say it's met 149.2%.
Right,
Okay,
yeah,
gotcha. Thanks.
yeah. I should be, yeah, we'll have to go back through the report and be like, yeah, this would have been helpful to put a line here, some of those things. Yep, those are really good
Yeah,
points.
that would be helpful. I think it is going to be confusing because even just trying to conceptually understand why that number is changing, it'd be hard for me to explain it to someone. So I think it's a little bit complicated. But I get it. Anybody else have questions on that one?
And that's actually the end, because we got through average density. So, unless anyone else has any more questions, these are how our new data will be reflected in the annual report, which we'll be working on early next year.
And you did very good. You always said multifamily, I think, twice.
I know it is hard when you get used to saying something to extract it from your vocabulary.
Yeah, it is. So Heather, you're looking for action on this particular item. What are you looking for? Just, like the feedback that we provided, or are you looking for kind of a more specific, are you good with what you've been?
Yeah, I didn't hear any
What we've
red
been saying.
flags. Yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
hear any red flags as far as the format. I think you guys understand the constraints that we're in. And those were all great questions and helpful for us for figuring out how to explain this in the report.
Okay.
I mean, unless I mischaracterize, if there's anybody that has red flags, definitely raise your hand.
I don't see any red flags. Having followed the middle housing part, all of that pretty closely, it makes really good sense to me, but I do know that it's complicated, and just because we're using different terms and stuff. So, Sue.
I'm just sitting here noticing that it's so much more complex than it was when we were first doing this with TRG, where it was like multifamily, single family. That was it. And now I think it's good. I mean, I think it's broken it down to a point where we can actually have some real discussions about what kind of housing is needed, what kind of housing is not being met, rather than being lumped into just two big categories. So I actually think it's very beneficial. It just takes a little while to kind of get the terminology at hand, but it's a good thing.
John.
Yeah, I think for me, the greatest takeaway, and this kind of goes to what was said earlier about, are we tracking this and where's it going? The last time when we did the UGB analysis, it was almost left to city council at the diocese deciding what's our housing mix going to be and what is it, right? And let's go 50-50, let's go 45-55. Literally, that's how it was. Now, with this monitoring, it's like, no, this is what it has been. This is what it is. This is what we think we will need. And we won't, those the next time that we do this, those forecasts are going to be a lot closer to what is actually being built. And that's the whole idea behind this monitoring and why it was so important to put it in there, so that when we do move to the next level, we've got data that we can go to. And I think it's fabulous. I think this is just going to be a great tool in the upcoming deliberations.
Thank you, John. Well, if nobody else has any other comments, should we move? I know we have Alexis that has joined us, and we also have just some next steps to talk about, but I thought maybe we could do the next steps first. If that made sense.
Sure, I can just really quickly, because it hasn't changed since really last time. I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about the UGB analysis. So as you guys saw on the agenda, the main things that we want to bring to you are, we looked at an annual report template, which will not be 300 pages or anywhere near it, just as a reminder for everyone's sanity. But it will have a lot of key data in it. And we had a hard time knocking off what data isn't key data, right? And so so there will be a lot of key data in it, but we want to bring that report template back to you to look at. We looked at it when we first were talking about report templates, and so we need to dust that off. And then I think population and employment growth will be the first ones that we can bring to you where there are where there is updated data. And then jobs data, we have some new jobs data, ACS, American Community Survey data, and then housing permit data. We will get that to you as soon as we can. I'm not exactly sure what's going to be first, but I think because with housing permit data, it's more than just numbers. It's like buildable lands inventory impact. There's a lot of stuff that goes with it. It might be later in the review cycle, but just so you know that that's we're starting to pull that stuff together to bring to you guys. That was really it. That was all I had. And the bylaws.
Oh, right. Okay. So anyone have any questions about any of that? Oh, Ed, I see a hand.
Not a question about that. Two things that I wanted to say is, being my last meeting, Heather, I want you to know that my respect for you is over the moon. I've always enjoyed working with you. And my other comment, I was hoping to bring this up at some point, but knowing I'm not going to have the opportunity now, I'd like to express a concern I have with urban reserves, and it may or may not go anywhere. But I remember in the original Envision Eugene out on Clear Lake, we had a really nice 20-minute neighborhood planned for an expansion at one point. And Toxic Right to Know came up and said, no, you cannot expand there. The air is not clean enough. It's not equitable for the people who would move there. And I was thinking, are any of the urban reserves that we're establishing going to fall into that category as well? And so that's the question. There's some clarity that I'd like to have. The urban reserves that we are about to adopt, if they're ever coming into the urban growth boundary, is the same issue going to come up? And that's it.
Thanks, Ed. I really, really appreciate your comments. It's been a pleasure working with you over a decade. And so, and I'm glad we can still smile about it because it's a lot. We've been doing a lot, and sometimes they're hard conversations. And so I just appreciate your willingness to work through these things and bring up issues. And so we will definitely pass that on to Rebecca and flag that. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, so I appreciate it. And we'll follow up with you.
Well, thank you. We do have Alexis that has joined us, and I know Alexis, I'll just kind of turn it over to you because I know you have some exciting things to share. So.
Yeah. Thanks, Tiffany. And yeah, like Ed, I have some bittersweet news. This is also my last meeting. I accepted the job about a month ago, and I started a few weeks ago working with the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and I'll be there, or I am now their legislative and policy coordinator. So I'm basically the tight part of the funnel that goes between the agency and the legislature, trying to work on all of the work of the department, including urban and rural work. And this experience with you all has been just tremendous. I think I've been closer engaged with the work of Eugene than any other city throughout the state, largely because of this group. And just watching the quality of the work that's been done here firsthand has just been, I think, a model for me as a professional, and just, planning, I think, for the whole state, that I hope to keep preaching about to other cities around the state. And along with what John mentioned a moment ago around this work being so important, I just want to emphasize that with the changes that are coming with the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, that this type of work that you all have been at the forefront of is going to play so well into the type they call the next generation of the way that we're going to be working with Goal 10, leading with production. And instead of this bean counting exercise that we've done in the past, where it's led to this question, like John pointed out, about do we want 45 or 55% multifamily? And I think just the data that you've already been working on generating and synthesizing and analyzing is going to be so valuable in the future discussions, and you'll be that much further along in the conversation. So I will stay tuned, and I'll always be here from the department saying as a resource, and would love to hear your experiences with how the new state laws are working. And I'll just emphasize that I've really enjoyed working with you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really appreciate your involvement. Yeah, this is a hard meeting, you guys.
And also, I also have included a note with in my departing memo, 1,000 Friends. I'm hoping that in the not too distant future, somebody else who may take over my position could try to be present for y'all.
Yes, that'd be great. Well, I'm excited for you, and again, bittersweet. You and I've worked on so many different things in wearing our different hats, everything from housing and transportation and all the stuff. And so I've really, really appreciated working with you, and look forward to crossing paths in the future, because I'm pretty sure we will. So good things. Well, I don't, oh, John, you got your hand up. Is that new?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Alex. And it's almost fitting that the two of you are leaving at the same time, because that was something that was, I think, the beauty of this committee was the partnership between 1,000 Friends and the Home Builders Association to be able to collaborate to build this Envision Eugene and move forward. Even though at the beginning it looked like you would be coming and running from both ends and butting heads, it was much more of a this. And I think that goes to both of you and your predecessors at 1,000 Friends. And I think it's a great, like I said, a great model. Just because you look at things through different lenses doesn't mean that you can't come to the same goal.
Well said, John. Well, I hate to leave things on such a somber note, but at the same time, I have a 5 a.m. flight in the morning, so I got to get, hopefully it's not snowing, but gonna get packed and head to Chicago, where it's nice and warm this time of year. So I guess if there is no further business of the group, I can go ahead and adjourn us for the evening, and we will see you all coming up. Let's see, it's December 15th?
Yeah, tentatively hold that. We'll see,
Okay.
but we'll try to let you know as soon as we can if that's not happening.
Okay. Great.
Thank you, Alexis. Thank
Jen.
you, Ed. Appreciate it.
See
Thanks,
you guys.
everybody.
Thank you,
Take care.
guys.
Good luck.
All right, we're adjourned.
Happy holidays.